Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies. We will get started with this session, which is Innovations in Clean Energy. And we have here with us four finalists, in fact, well, four finalists and one winner, but you can only count, obviously, there's three finalists, one winner, I'm not sure how to define it, but of the Zaid Future Energy Prize. And what I'm going to do is, I think the first thing we'll want to do is hear their stories. What is it they're doing? They are all leaders, they are all innovators, and so let's hear their stories. And then what we'll do is we'll try and generalize and see if there's any lessons that we can draw out in terms of tech innovation, business innovation, financial innovation, and so on. So, for those who might not know, I'm Michael Liebreich. I forgot to mention. I'm the chairman of the advisory board now, but the founder of Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves as we bring them into the conversation. So our first contribution will be Jesse Moore, managing director and founder of M-Kopa Solar Kenya, and of course, a Zaid Future Energy Prize winner. What do you tell us about M-Kopa and yourselves?
Well, thank you for the intro. Thank you for inviting me here today. And of course, thanks for the great honor of being selected among some very esteemed other finalists. It's a terrific honor to be here at all, never mind of being selected as the prize winner for this year. So it's a real thank you from the bottom of my heart and from our entire team, of which there's over 500 staff in our small company. And I was joking at the press conference the other day, I hope we come back in a few years in the large corporate category. We're growing that quickly that it's well possible we may be there. So what I want to speak about is related to the idea of scaling. I think innovations matter when they lead to great scale, which has both an impact on the world, an impact on the customers, and an impact on pockets, or creates a great return opportunity for investors, and I think we hit all of that. The way to really start telling about M-Kopa, which by the way means M for mobile, Kopa for boro in Kiswahili, the language of East Africa, and solar for solar. So if you read our name, literally, we're mobile boro solar. It gives you a hint that we're actually very interested and very much coming from a financial services or a financial access standpoint, not so much the energy side. And so our innovation came from the recognition that in markets like Kenya, a huge amount of money is spent on off-grid energy substitutes. Kerosene being a large portion of that. Kerosene is used for lighting in the majority of homes in Kenya. And it doesn't look like a lot of money, but it's about 50 cents a day per household. And in Kenya, we've got about 7 million of these households. In Uganda, where we also operate, another 7 million households. And in Tanzania, yet another 7 million households. So roughly 20 million households spending 50 cents a day starts to become a big number. That's nearly a $5 billion market opportunity in East Africa. And on a global level, when we think of the rest of Africa and particularly South Asia, there's a $50 billion market off the electricity grid. 50 billion. So the innovation that we're chasing is the opportunity to bring some of that $50 billion into better, cleaner energy, which helps our customers, helps our investors, and helps the environment all at the same time. The way we do this is we use mobile technology. So the other innovation that Africa's been very much caught up in over the past 15, 20 years is the mobile phone revolution. Who would have thought, 15, 20 years ago that every African household almost would have a mobile phone, and that mobile phone would be their first connection to the wider world, to market information, to trading. And now, in East Africa especially, people move money through their phones. And you may have heard of a system called M-Pesa, mobile cash. That's actually what we worked on before we got to M-Kopa, and you can see why we went from financial services now into energy. So, with people moving cash through their phones, as our company, we can collect micropayments from hundreds of thousands of customers on a daily basis with relative ease. And we do that today. We have over 150,000 homes using our solar systems in East Africa. We collect over 10,000 single transactions every single day into our back-end platform. And then what we do is put GSM technology into solar systems, and this is maybe the biggest leap, but we turn solar systems into phones. That's so that we can regulate their usage based on payment. And to the earlier session, if you were here for the Internet of Energy, we're an Internet of Energy company hands down, because we have 150,000 connected solar systems that have gone out, by the way, in just over 2 years. So in 2 years, these 150,000 solar systems are giving us real-time information about how much sunlight there is and how fast the panels are charging up batteries, how those batteries are performing over time, what they're being discharged to use and power, whether that's lighting or phone charging or radios. And so the innovation came, to make a long story short, from looking at what poor people were doing, spending money off the grid. We've brought it on grid, not using wires, but using wireless communications and mobile. And now I think we're about to see a whole abundance of new innovation coming, because we're watching so much data. And that data will lead us to more and more opportunities to innovate and scale again.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you talk through, since the beginning of MCOPA, just talk us through how many years or probably months, what were the milestones?
I would say about 5 years ago this week, there was the famous dinner conversation in a napkin, which prompted me to move to Kenya and get the business going shortly thereafter. We were 1 year in piloting and bringing on what we thought was a great success of 400 customers in a year. We thought, wow, this is worth, giving up everything and chasing for the next decade or more. It was another year to then turn the technology into something that was really commercial grade, that we could really scale. And then the 2 years since then, till now, 2.5 years, have been all about massive growth, really as much growth as we can handle. It's not without a lot of work. So we have a huge team that's both delivering solar systems in rural Kenya to consumers, and then servicing those customers with over the phone call center support in Nairobi. But we've gone from selling 400 systems in a year to selling 400 systems by 4 o'clock every day. So we currently sell north of 500 systems a day. That's brought us to 150,000 total households reached. By the way, those households are predominantly living below the World Bank defined poverty line. So 80% of our customers are poor, but there's no charity involved in this business. It is saving them money, and it's making our company money at the same time, as well as helping the environment. And this year we hope to scale 2 or 3x over last year and keep going to our target, which is right now 1 million homes by 2017.
So I think out there, those listening to this understand why you won the prize. Let's turn to Mark de Groote, Chief Executive Officer of EcoNation Belgium. And over that same or similar 5 years, you also were innovating in the energy space. Tell us your story.
Thank you, Michael. Hello to everybody. Thank you for being here. Also, thank you very much to the organization for this nice event, for this nice initiative, and also for inviting us and making us amongst the finalists. Congratulations to Jess for this very nice story. We are into something a little bit different. We are in daylight, but we use daylight to lighten the space inside a building. What we have developed is a technology called the light catcher. I think it's a very appropriate name. It is something like a dome that will be installed on top of a roof, and that will hold a mirror inside that totally autonomously will at any point in time find the brightest spot in the air, in the sky, and reflect that light into the space below through a highly reflective shaft, and also through 2 lenses. The role of the lenses being to make the light diffuse when it comes in. So when you experience the light inside such a place, it's a very nice, constant light. It's diffuse, it doesn't follow the sun. And on top of that, those 2 lenses will create 2 standing layers of air, and that will act as a isolator. The result of this light catcher, must I say, is a very efficient technology. We mostly implement it today in industrial spaces and public spaces, in large spaces with roofs as high as 8 to 13 meters. And in these buildings, one light catcher with a surface of approximately 1 square meter will effectively lighten up 100 square meters underneath. So it is very effective. It's a very small surface to lighten a big surface. So it's very efficient, and also it provides a good feeling to the people, and also sometimes animals, who live inside the place. Because I can tell you that those who see and who are in these spaces feel, how good it is to work and to be in a place that is lightened by natural light instead of artificial light. We also have observed very positive results of, it was more for the animals there, of breeding them in such a space. So it's a very positive, very efficient technology. And when I tell that to people, and when people view it, they ask me, well, this thing as it is now is probably installed on all the roofs in Belgium where we mostly operate. That's where I told the story. So it should be sitting everywhere. And that's not the case, and that's where the challenge is somewhere, because this technology is very easy. It's very easy to convince architects who build new buildings to use that technology and to implement it right from the front. It's something that gets integrated in the idea. But when it comes to bring it on top of the roofs of existing buildings, we come back to the economics of the thing. Where people say then, or the companies would say, I have lighting already, so it will cost me additional money. I will have to spend money. There will be a capex. And what is the return on investment of this technology? The return on investment of this technology will be quite okay, 2 to 4 years in quite some cases, but in other cases not. It depends on the situation. So that's the reason why we came up with an alternative idea to push this, and this is what we would call the financing, how do you say it? The economics, the savings. So what we actually sell to the client is not, in this second model, in this second business model, is not the light catcher as a technology. They will not buy the hardware, but they will buy light. And how does it work? Well, actually what we do with the light catcher, we will, on top of bringing in the light, we will measure the light that comes in, and we will control the artificial light. When there is enough light, we will switch off the lights. And we will monitor this. So we will be able, month after month, day after day, to tell the client how many hours he was able to cut off his artificial light. So we can actually measure the positive impact that we achieve through this technology. And this can be the basis of a financing model where when the client would make an economy of 100 euro or dollars per month, okay, we can then ask him to pay part of that money to us as a payment for the lights. So that's making everybody happy, us, because this is getting the revenue from the technology, and the client will not spend any money up front. He will even save money as soon as the thing gets installed. So this is, again, something that looks very bright. It's a very nice idea, but yet it doesn't work. And that's a challenge that I'm facing still today. It works sometimes, but not always. And the reason, I will not go too much into details, but that's the challenge that we have now, is these alternative models where we sell services or we sell benefits rather than just technology, are still struggling with some things. If you look at the client themselves, the client today in our regions, at least, I don't know if it's the case everywhere, but when the client will calculate the final costs of the second business model, he will find out that eventually it's more expensive than when he would buy the technology. And that is because of the measurements or the initiatives undertaken by the governments, where they will be quite positive to those who will buy or acquire the technology, but that doesn't work. So subsidies are, for instance, there, and subsidies will reduce the return on investment. But when you rent the thing, you won't have that advantage. See, this is one thing. The other thing for the client as well is, well, he will be facing a certain amount to pay for a certain period of time, but he doesn't know how his business will evolve. Will that continue to be interesting as opposed to buying the thing? And the risk for the one who is actually providing the funds to us and who is providing the loan, so to speak, to the client, is the risk is there. The fact that this type of loan is typically going to take quite some time to elapse. It is a certain investment. If you don't want to make the client pay too much money each month, okay, the loan, so to speak, will take a certain time. And then you have these aspects of risks. If it takes 10, sorry?
We're getting very deep into the model and
Yeah.
also the difficulties.
Okay.
But I want to if you could just talk us through, as Jesse did, the 5 years or the time since founding. How long did you work on technology, etc.? So just give us that, and then we'll move on.
Well, I think the technology was there quite fairly quick because we had this idea.
When were you founded?
In 2010.
2010.
Actually,
Okay.
2010. Okay, so we've been for 4 years now. We've been working very closely with the universities back in Belgium to develop that idea of an autonomous system that is capable of tracking the most bright spot in the air. And very quickly, we brought together some simple elements,
And which year did you make your first sale?
The first sale was already in 2010.
Already in 2010.
Yeah.
Okay,
but it was a fairly small organization with one person.
Right.
And then the next year we were 3, and today we were still six people. So it's still quite small.
And one final question before I move on. What do you think is the sort of the mature size of the business, however you would measure it, either in millions or in staff, or what do you think of as the mature version of your company? We heard a little bit from Jesse.
To be in the future.
Yes.
Well, I think this is a technology that should be available in a box everywhere in the world. More applicable in certain regions, depending on sun and so on, hours sun per day. But it's something that should be sold by thousands all over the world.
Okay, so we've had 2 stories of innovation, essentially over a 5-year period. I'm going to turn to Simon Trace, Chief Executive Officer of Practical Action, United Kingdom. Practical Action is one of the real pedigreed players in this space over a, let's put it this way, I'm going to, without revealing anything, over a longer period than just 5 years. Tell us your story.
Thank you. Yes, slightly longer than 5 years. We were established about 50 years ago now as an organisation to focus on the role that technology plays in transforming poor people's lives, or the potential that technology can play in transforming poor people's lives in the developing world. And we currently work across 4 sectors, so food, energy, water, and disaster risk reduction. And we look at the role technology plays in all of those. I mean, in the energy sector, we've been active for most of that 50 years. In the earlier part, it would have been on technology development, whether that was clean cook stoves. We helped establish in Nepal the sort of national capacity for manufacturing turbine blades for small micro-hydro programs, and we like to think that we're behind. We contributed significantly to the sort of 2,500 micro-hydro schemes that are there in the country today. Today, we probably focus more on sort of mini-grids and microgrids and trying to actually understand the next wave of innovation, if you like, that's going to be needed, which is financial innovation, how you actually make those work, because at the moment they don't. They're not financially sustainable in their own rights. One of the things we've been doing over the last 4 years is to start looking at to really look at the definition of energy access, because we have this goal, the UN set a goal of universal access by 2030 without anybody ever actually defining what access means. And we've gone back to villages, to communities in different countries and tried to actually get an understanding of what universal access or access to energy means to people. And we've come up with a definition which is based on services rather than connections. The traditional measure of energy access is how many people are connected and generally connected to the grid. As of yet, the national statistics don't really very well reflect the sort of work that MCOBA and CELCO are doing. And that's a problem in itself. But if you ask people, what they want is they want access to energy services. It doesn't really matter where the energy comes from, so long as they have access to services for lighting, for heating, for cooking, ideally for cooling, for refrigeration, communications, and mechanical power for livelihoods. And it's that bottom end that is a real challenge. I mean, we produce an annual report now called the Poor People's Energy Outlook. The latest version has just been published in Arabic. If anybody would like an Arabic copy, please see me. I've got a bag full. I really don't want to take them back. But what we've been calling for is a transformation of the way energy access is measured. We've been working with SMAP and the World Bank over the last 2 or 3 years to develop a methodology which is now forming the basis of the UN SC4 global tracking framework. And over a period of time, we hope to see that the world will move on from actually just measuring in terms of access in terms of connections to measuring access in terms of people's access to basic energy services. And just to finish, I think if we're talking about business innovations and way forwards, I think our big challenge at the moment is to look at how you can move beyond lighting, phone connections and maybe a small TV to refrigeration and to motive power for productive use. And that's where you have to probably go beyond certainly go beyond the solar home systems that the technology provides today, probably more towards mini-grids. And at the moment, those are not financially viable. I think that's the sort of real big challenge that we're looking at the moment. How do you close that financial gap?
Okay, and that's I'm on the advisory board of Sustainable Energy for All, and I must say this question of how you define access does very much worry me, because we talk about now 1.2 billion people without access to electricity, but actually they all have mobile phones. So, or not all, but there are, a very large proportion, and so clearly that your approach is important. But then equally, you've got people who are being counted as having a grid connection, but don't have the money to pay the bill. So actually, they're not using the grid. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, with the SC4 Global Tracking Framework now, we've introduced a 5-tier framework where Tier 5 would effectively be full 24-hour grid, and Tier 0 is basically nothing. And there's the next Global Tracking Framework report will come out probably in May this year, the 2015 one, and there'll be some initial studies using that framework, which are really interesting. There's one carried out in Kinshasa, which sort of looked at the existing official statistics for connectivity, which were up in the 90%, and then actually looked against that tier structure and got an outcome of something of the order of 1.5. So.
I'm smiling because I actually suggested this to Richenda van Leeuwen probably 4 years ago. I don't know if that I don't know if we co-evolved the idea or that was the seed. And also, I'd love to have a chat later, because how you get reporting needs to be very granular, region by region, because but it's not country by country. But what I want to do, though, is to move on to Surabhi Rajagopal, Principal Analyst, Selco India, because you were nodding, and I know why you were nodding, as Simon was saying, but you need to get beyond just the solar lighting, and I'll come back to you, Jesse, about your plans for that, but you were nodding and saying yes, and that's actually the area that you have been working on with Harish Hande, who's been here in previous years, who's the CEO of Selco and a good friend. But talk to me about what you're doing in that kind of step as people move up the energy escalator.
Thanks, Michael. So I think to just give you a context of where we are in terms of Selco. Selco started off 20 years ago as a social enterprise looking at decentralized renewable energy access for the poor. It was looking at energy access for the poor, and the most sensible way to do it seemed like decentralized renewable energy. Questions came up about financing and how do you look at poor people affording these sort of technologies. And it was decided that a banking mechanism, the local, regional, rural bank, seemed like the most appropriate source for financing for these small energy technologies. So we started off just trying to look at regional rural banks in a state called Karnataka, which is based in South India, and trying to get bankers to lend for solar energy. And what started off there has come a long way from there. Over the last 20 years, we've realized that there's a large missing gap in terms of an ecosystem for energy access provision. And when I talk about the ecosystem, the previous session spoke about the internet for energy. And honestly, in my head, the way we thought about the internet for the energy industry is more in terms of an ecosystem. In terms of what do you need to be able to run Google, right? You needed the internet to exist for Google to run, and Google did not pay for the internet. So I think we use this analogy very often to say you have energy enterprises working in the sector who are trying to provide services on a for-profit basis, and yet you do not have that ecosystem or the foundation. No one has created it for these organizations to exist. So we're trying to look at what is the kind of ecosystem that's required. It may be in terms of training of financial institutions. It may be in terms of de-risking financial institutions and these local banks so that they would be able to lend for energy. It might be in terms of developing skills on the ground so that at the end of the day, when you have a solar panel in the middle of a village, there is still someone in that village who can service that system. Today, Selco depends on its branches, on its branch network. We have about 40 branches across the 4 southern states in India looking at this, and that's a key part of the model. And we've realized that if instead, just like with mobile phones, we had an energy access technician in every village who had a different occupation, who could manage this, that would change the way decentralized solar energy or decentralized renewable energy is looked at in the space. That would also increase the acceptance of financial institutions to be willing to lend. Now, moving beyond solar home lighting systems, which is probably the basic version, and we went for that because it was individual ownership. We were talking directly to an end user, and we were talking to a banker and getting them both to work with each other. We had a service network that would do the installation and then do the maintenance. Largely, we've begun to realize that even though there are many areas we work in where the grid is unreliable and a large percentage of our customers actually are connected to the grid already, we still realize that there is a case to be made for moving beyond home lighting systems into other aspects of energy that are needed by households, that are needed by communities to grow. Since then, we created the Selco Foundation to look at this ecosystem development and to look at technology innovation, because we said that ideally there would be a different entity that's created this. So we're looking now at productive utilizations, not just the technologies, because there's the energy efficiency component and you have to bring that down to what plays out on the field, but also how do you combine that with the right type of financing and the right type of dissemination model to get it working on the field. And at the end of the day, can you bring it to a stage where you have an entrepreneur in a village actually running the system as a for-profit business? Simon was speaking about microgrids or mini grids and the financial viability behind it. Just to give you a small example, we recently did a system that is by no means a mini grid, but rather a pico grid, a very small system of 75 households. But what we managed in that process was to look at innovation from the perspective of how do you ensure collections and financial feasibility of this system. And so we have a landlord who has houses that he gives out to tenants who are local labor. So there are about 75 households in a small rural town in Karnataka. And what we did was to help this individual access bank financing so that he could put up a mini grid in his house that would be providing power to these 75 households. And what he does is he's already collecting a rent from these households. He just has a markup on that to be able to collect for amenities as well. So I think looking at innovations, technology is important, energy efficiency is important, but what is the financing mechanism behind it and what is the community dissemination model that comes with it is a critical part of our work.
And I think that's been a theme amongst all of the opening contributions, which is that the technology in and of itself is not enough. If I was to ask each of you in turn, there's a number of different elements: financial, technological, business, innovation. Let's limit it to those. You've talked about social innovation, and I think that, Simon, you have done a lot in that. But if we just stick to finance, technology, or business model, maybe we can, I don't know, you might want to come out. We don't have to do this rigorously. Give us an idea. Is it 50-50? Is it 20% technology? Is it 80% technology? Let's go down the row.
Well, if I can offer one of my favorite lines that's come up in 5 years of building this business is we were meeting with some engineers who were helping with us, and we said, could you do this thing? And they said, technically, we can do anything. And we often think about that technically we can do anything. I mean, the world is an amazing place, and if you put minds together and technologies together, we can really do some amazing things. But I think the technology bit is probably about 10% of the effort.
Let's try to be rigorous. How many engineers versus how many business people in the business?
Well, in our business, we have about 80 engineers at the moment.
Out of 500?
Out of 560 employees.
So that's 15%.
Yes. Yeah, there you
16,
go. Okay.
16%. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go down the row.
For me, it's not because it's sustainable that it shouldn't be as effective and as efficient as other technology. So technology is important. It has to work. It has to be at least as good as the rest. And for the rest, I think for me, it's very important to continue investing into technology to make it more simple, in order to make it more accessible to a wider range of people and organizations. So technology is very important. But finance is also important because they always calculate in the end, it's not only about sustainability, it still needs to be profitable.
And the ratio in your company of engineers?
Engineers will be like the same like Simon. It's,
15%.
Yeah,
15%.
yeah.
15%.
If I don't count universities and so on, of course.
So I think for us, technology has always been 10 to 20%. It's becoming a little important with the newer livelihood applications, but financing and the business model is probably the remaining part.
The remaining part.
And
okay,
if
this is fascinating. We're getting a pattern here. Yeah.
If you're to look at the number of engineers, there are probably 30 engineers, most of them who left their jobs with IT companies or engineering companies to look at the non-technical side of things.
Right.
So.
And Simon, what's the ratio at Practical Action?
Sorry, but we do have technicians on the field.
Right.
Well,
I mean, we work quite a lot with partners, so it's quite difficult to actually get the overall ratio. But we're probably less than 10% technical people in our work now. I mean, if we go back to the sort of mini-grid, microgrid issue, I mean, that for me is 90%, well, probably 95% about financing. And there's certainly room for a business model and for private capital to contribute towards that. But at the moment, we've got a big financial gap between what is recoverable in terms of tariffs with the sort of people that we're looking at to get universal access to energy and what the business would actually cost to run. And I think at the moment, we're going to need to start to think about public finance to bridge that gap. You look at something like the Bangladesh solar home model. It started in 2003, it had a 25% capital subsidy. That's dropped down to about 10% now, but the net price to the consumer is actually less than it was in 2003 because the price of technology has come down. But with mini-grids, I think we've still yet to bite the bullet and realise that they're probably not going to be delivered with private capital alone, at least at the outset. We've got to sort of cross that bridge.
Okay, that's interesting. I just want to summarize on that. I mean, to me, that was very insightful, that the technology, the raw technology, this is about innovations in clean energy, and here you've got 4 of the leading entrepreneurial drivers of that, and talking about somewhere between 10 and 20% raw technology. That reminds me of the first session at this conference that I was on, which was the FT IRENA question time, underneath the extraordinary solar impulse aeroplane, where Bertrand Piccard, the pilot and originator of the project, said this is all about the innovation is integrating all of the existing technologies that are out there, materials, etc., etc. And I think there's a fascinating discussion to talk about, well, who pump primes those technologies so they can be integrated in, because that's not really represented here, deep materials innovation and so on. But you bring up, Simon, a very important point, which is the role of policy. To what extent have your businesses, and again, I think we can go in either direction down the line, to what extent have you relied on benign has the policy in your area been supportive, benign, or a problem? Let's do this, supportive, benign, problem. Jesse.
East Africa's, and Kenya specifically, have been between supportive and benign.
Which is best is the other thing you have to say.
I think benign in the long run.
I
think benign just because building a business on the back of a particular policy or particular tax break has big risks. So benign I like. The government's been supportive because in East Africa there's been a VAT exemption towards solar, which I think is very healthy in the early years in order to make solar competitive. But interestingly, there's also a VAT exemption on kerosene, which is what we feel is our competition. So you could call that sort of equal.
And that's benign.
That's benign then. The VAT was removed on solar for a brief period last year, but luckily the government changed their mind on that and went
regulatory hurdles to do presumably you went through those with M-Pesa, and by the time you do Ancover, it's not that hard, or?
Well, yeah, M-Pesa is a different animal and has been very much subject to regulatory sort of controls and views, as it should be. But in our case, the regulation for what we're doing isn't that stringent because it's pretty much a consumer-friendly product.
Let's move down the road. So, benign, positive, or negative?
Supportive, but they should think further and support also alternative business models and so to help us even further. So they have been supportive, but they could do better.
Okay, all right. Can you tell us in what way? What's the single innovation, single more supportive policy initiative that you'd like to see for your business?
Well, as I said,
your Christmas list.
Well, as I said, to support, for instance, this alternative business model.
Right.
As I explained earlier.
So to tax equalize between the capital spend and the lease spend, for instance.
Okay. But also right. to create a sense of urgency towards sustainable energy, even more than today, where it's right. still too much about the economics and not enough about sustainability.
So Robbie, you're so supportive, benign, or obstructive?
Non-existent till 2009, but since then there's been the National Solar Mission, which provides incentives through a banking mechanism. Unfortunately counterproductive because of the procedures involved rather than the theory behind it. And we think benign in terms of actually building the ecosystem for energy access.
Benign to obstructive in your case. Simon, and you can choose examples because you've worked across so many sectors. What's the overall picture?
I mean, we'd come back to this sort of word which was used a minute ago, ecosystem of policies. I think our overall assessment of policies generally for energy access is that they are benign to neglectful. In the sense that most energy sector policy focuses on the formal energy utilities and what they do, and it doesn't take account of the fact that off-grid access to energy is actually going to require a whole range of different players, often not the major utility suppliers, and the regulation is just not designed for that. So I think neglectful perhaps is a more accurate word. We need to think about the ecosystem of players and therefore the ecosystem of policy and support and capacity building that's required to actually make that work.
So it goes from obstructive, neglectful, benign to supportive, and we're sort of we're not really in the kind of supportive zone.
Sorry, just to jump in on his point, I think people kept coming back to us saying you're one organization working in Karnataka, what do you know about policy in North India, right? So we've created this network of decentralized clean energy players in India to try and bring that view forward, because without the practitioners really being involved in policy, it often becomes an exercise that's a closed door meeting with no understanding of the realities on the ground, whether it's the realities of the local banker or the local
That's a fabulous segue into a topic that I wanted to bring in at this point anyway, which is the traditional, and I think given the areas you're working, we'll call it the utility model. There are other parts of the energy sector. Because what you're saying is you're legion, you're diffuse, but of course the big utilities, the big energy companies, they sit in the capital cities or the state capitals, they're there, they have lobbyists, et cetera, but who wants to talk about any of the things that you're working on? What does it do, despite all that, to the utility model? I mean, is the end point still going to be a utility as we recognize it today? I mean, you're sort of outside. You're outside the utility space, but certainly Jesse, Surabhi, and Simon, if you want to comment as well.
Well, I'd start by saying that so here's my vision, 10, 20 years out. The majority of the world that lives off the grid today will still be off the grid, but they'll be powered. They'll be powered by rooftop or backyard solar or wind generation that powers their own needs within the home, and then the products that they power will include fridges and will include agricultural machinery, because there'll be a new market that we can design these low power DC appliances for. Now what that means to the grid is, thank you, everybody has got a connection, even though the grid and the economics of the grid don't suit many of the people that will be in the off-grid market. To put a parallel here, landlines and conventional banking infrastructure don't work for the poorest of the poor. They just aren't bringing enough business to make the infrastructure pay for itself. And in Kenya today, even if the grid connection runs right over my house, I have to pay about a $400 US connection fee to start paying for the grid. And the Kenya Power and Lighting Company rightly is saying $400 per connection doesn't cover our costs. So they're lobbying to double it to $800 or $1,000 a connection. And even then, I think they'll be making a loss on those customers. So the innovation here is realizing that people can be better served by an off-grid solution. And an unnamed utility company recently called us. We're competing with them in their market, but they said, can we help you? Because if you can connect all those homes that we don't really have a business to connect, we'll have a better social license with the government as well as society. So I think there's a great marriage of off-grid with on-grid.
And your response was presumably, can we help you lobby for that $800 charge? But are you really saying that in a sense that the fringe of the grid is essentially going to freeze where it is? Because I have vicious flame wars on Twitter with the Breakthrough Institute guys, because they believe that everything ultimately will be grid, and only grid can deliver the services, and it's grid, and it's probably nuclear, by the way. And I, of course, but this is saying that the fringes of the grid will move no more from today rather than somewhere intermediate is quite an extreme position.
Well, I think it's true. I don't think the grid needs to connect a number of houses, eventually businesses, in the off-grid world today. But the fringe might go.
Industry?
Yeah, well, and certainly industry, hospitals, airports, those things will need grid. I don't want to make the case for off-grid for everything. But even when you say the fringe, the grid may extend over here, but within this geographic circle, there's plenty of different users. Some of the users in that area might have the ability to catch the grid because it's running over the top of the roof, but they're not purchasing enough of it to make economic sense for the connection.
I want to bring Simon, because you've clearly thought lots about this grid, non-grid. Where do you think the fringes of the grid end up when the music stops?
It's a sort of variation on the theme you just heard, I think. I think the mobile phone versus landline is a great analogy. I think nobody wants a landline anymore. They're just, and we need a vision which actually makes off-grid the equivalent of mobile in terms of desirability. But I think the really smart thing and the sort of long-term vision is distributed power generation, some of which is connected to the grid and can make an economic benefit by selling power back into the grid, some of it which is acting independently, but which is in effect democratizing power production. You're actually literally putting power in the hands of people. People are becoming their own power producers. They're actually able to make money out of producing power, and that model of centralized utilities as the only way in which power is produced will certainly halt its growth. I mean, you see Aon already splitting its business and getting rid of its sort of dirty side and thinking about focusing on the renewables. I think we're beginning to see signs that is going to solidify, and we are. The vision is a renewable, a distributed power, some of which is going back into the grid, some of which is independent.
Shall you wanted to jump in on that as well, or have we answered it?
No, I think I would echo sentiments that Jesse and Simon have already made, but I think the point is also that governments should be interested in doing this as not just a stopgap measure. They should be interested, because India has a lot of policies that support decentralized distributed generation. They exist, but in paper they're treated as amazing policies, but when you come and talk to the policymaker, it's often seen as a stopgap measure, which then becomes a problem.
And I think that's a really important point, by the way, for any policymakers or influencers of policymakers out there, that one of the reasons not to enable these technologies is the fear that they may become redundant. Why would you do solar homes, solar businesses, mini grids, if the grid is only going to have to go there anyway in 3 years or 4 years before the payback? And so if what we're hearing loud and clear, which we are, is that don't worry about that, go ahead and do your stuff, then that's a really important policymaker message. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, and also think the other thing we haven't talked about is about resilience and a distributed grid. When Hurricane Sandy hit the east coast of the States, the first people with electricity were the people with solar power on their rooftops. And we're creating a more flexible system with distributed power that actually brings real benefits. And I think that's another reason why governments should actually want to create this rather than to fight it.
Okay. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left. what I want to do is just finish
Sorry,
very
and not
quickly.
to mention that there's often no power running through the grid. So
No, it's not-
that's a big problem.
I've been in the sort of place you're talking about where it's a statistic, it's a grid, it's a village with grid electricity and the grid is essentially dark. But I want just to finish off, I want to come back to the Zayed Future Energy Prize, which is the unifier for all of us. We've been very involved actually since the start. Just say a few words, and it will have to be sadly a few words. And I'm going to start with you, Mark, because you've been left out of this rural mini grid, save the world stuff. What did participating mean to you? What did you take? Are you sore because of the outcome, or was it a good process? And any advice to anybody out there who's thinking of entering next year?
No, for me, it's been a great experience, and of course, I'm not a sore loser. Absolutely not. But for me, it has been a good experience because it has emphasized on the meaningfulness of the things. This has brought me to review. Why are we doing this? Where should it go? Where should we invest into? Because it's the larger idea that's here, much more than the economics of the thing. Every day of my life, I'm running a business. I'm trying to grow the business, but also there's a reason why we should do it, and the reason why we should spend more energy in this instead of that. So it's been very useful for me to rethink that other side of the business.
Okay, a few words to anybody who's thinking of entering?
Few words.
A few words, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, sorry, just before I go to that, I think at least at this level, both of these were very strong contenders. So I don't think there's there would never be any soreness, because I think we knew that M-KOPA had a very strong model and that they were going to be up there. So in terms of for anyone who is applying, I think it's essential to think through the future part of it rather than what you've done in the past, because honestly it is the future energy price. So what is your vision for the future is probably what determines.
Okay. Simon?
No, I would encourage people to apply. I think I think the recognition itself of being a finalist is a huge honour and something that we are very proud of. I think the process is really interesting. I think the opportunity to talk to your peers during these processes as well is fantastic. I would really encourage people to apply.
Thank you. And a last word to our Zayed Future Energy Prize winner, Jesse.
Well, I 100% suggest to many people to apply. I think it's a great process to go through. I think it makes you think through your business in a very strategic sense. And winning or otherwise just being here, being put on a global stage with this much interest is a terrific experience. And I thank the organizers for bringing us all here.
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, I won't try and summarize that discussion. It's been rich, it's been varied, it's been fascinating. Thank you very much for your time and attention.